Hello and welcome to this cold and wet and miserable January day, January 2026. Now, it may just seem cold, wet, and miserable, and that's it, and there's no benefit of that. But actually, if you're living in North America and Northern Europe, then there is actually a benefit, and that relates to what this channel is about, which is about health, but also about fitness. And one of the primary benefits that of the health that I teach, that I coach, is losing weight sustainably. And one of those is through, well, mainly it's through the food. So food is the best way to control your health. Okay. Food is the most powerful, I would call it, medicine in order to regain your health. And that's based on what I teach, which is a vegan, a vegan plant-based, low-fat, low-protein, high-carbohydrate diet. I actually teach what is the human species-specific diet. So that's the brief intro on food. But talking about why being wet and miserable, okay, you don't have to be wet and miserable, but how this weather relates to losing weight is exercise. So that's the other thing that will manipulate your weight. So the food is the most important thing, and I've got loads of other videos talking about that, and I'll have more videos as well because it's very important. But for exercise, people always get confused. They think, well, I'm going to lose more weight maybe in the summer, or it's warm and cold weather doesn't help with that. Well, if you go out exercising, so I recommend cycling for most people because it has so many positive benefits. I coach sustainable health, so I think cycling is a sustainable exercise compared to other sports. Maybe if you're thinking in the winter, like skiing and cross country skiing, stuff like this, which that can be dangerous as well as being fun. But if you're thinking things like running, running might be great, but for a lot of people they get injured. So I actually never actually recommend running because it might be okay for weight loss, but eventually you will get injured if you're not used to it. Whereas cycling, it's a low impact sport, and as long as you're not stupid, like in anything, then you don't need to get injured. That's why I recommend cycling. And specifically when you're exercising in the cold versus warm weather, for the amount of exercise you do, so if you say you do maybe 6 hours a week cycling, the equivalent amount of weight loss for 6 hours worth of cycling in the cold weather like it is, it's about 3 or 4 degrees today and raining, just above freezing in the UK. If you're doing 6 hours in this sort of weather, maybe not necessarily raining, but maybe just above freezing or just below freezing, and it's dry, if you want to go out in the dry, you're a true warrior if you want to go out in the rain. And compared to 6 hours in the cold versus 6 hours in the warm, you're going to actually lose weight quicker versus you would if you were going to do 6 hours a week in the warm weather, if you just started doing exercise, or if you were thinking about, or if you're already exercising. So firstly, I want to very quickly put the groundwork down for the most important thing, which is the food. If you're not eating the right food, it doesn't matter what you do with exercise, you're never going to lose weight. Okay. So firstly, the human species specific diet is based on starch and fruit. So this naturally is a low fat. Okay, naturally is low fat. It's also naturally low protein and naturally high carbohydrate, which is great, isn't it? You're already setting the groundwork to be healthy by already eating a low fat diet. So you need to always remember the fat you eat is the fat you wear. The carbohydrate, and therefore the sugar you eat, is the potential chemical energy that you have in order to move your body. It's not stored as fat. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. The sugar you eat is it's laid down in the muscles, okay, as glycogen. So the glycogen that you have available allows you to move your body and get out there and enjoy life. And the protein you eat, okay, we don't have a store of protein, i.e., nitrogen, that is in protein. Our bodies want to excrete it, and that is the main function of the kidneys. So, no, you don't want to eat lots of protein because we don't naturally have a store for it. Yes, we can store fat, and the more fat you store to a certain point is okay, and then above that, you don't need more. And carbohydrate, we run on carbohydrate. Every cell in the human body runs on sugar. It doesn't run on protein, and fat is just a backup system that the body is using all the time. Whereas sugar, glucose derived ATP, is what the body runs on. So that's the groundwork. So if you're always eating a high fat diet, it doesn't matter if you go out and do loads of exercise in the cold, you're never going to be able to enjoy your life. So if you're always wondering why you're gaining weight uncontrollably, it's because you're eating the wrong foods. So what you should be eating is foods like rice. You should be eating foods like potatoes. Sorry about the noise. Barking dog. Rice, potatoes. You can also have things like corn. And yeah, if people ask, what about, lentils and things like this, always look to have the most highest carbohydrate foods. So I always recommend most of your dish should be made up of, if you're having, for example, dinner, mostly rice, maybe some beans, maybe some lentils, maybe some other vegetables, but mainly carbohydrate. And then just to make up for the lack of vitamin A and vitamin C, which rice, for example, is missing, potato is actually a complete nutrition, so that's great. But yeah, also fruit is good. So bananas, everyone loves bananas. You got more expensive fruits like watermelon, but starch and fruit. There you go. You sorted. But if you want to, enjoy exercise, and also you're coming into the lifestyle that I recommend, which is vegan, plant-based, low-fat, low-protein, high carbohydrate, based on the staple foods of starch and fruit. You're coming into that from eating foods, animal products. These are always high in fat, high in protein, low in carbohydrates. Then you've discovered this channel, or maybe this idea of eating plant-based, but specifically low-fat plant-based, okay? Then you want to lose weight, and you think, well, yeah, exercise, I need to do exercise along with that. So let's say if you're doing 6 hours of cycling a week, if you're doing that in the cold, you're going to lose weight more efficiently. And that is because it's about the laws of physics. So in order to maintain your body temperature, which is what a lot of glucose is used for, chemical energy that we eat is used for. So most of the energy that we use in our body is actually, used to run the brain. So actually, the next thing, obviously, you got the liver, but the brain uses most of the chemical energy that we eat, so sugar, and that's what's being burnt the most, because obviously our brain uses a lot of energy. Okay, and then next is the liver, but also we use energy to maintain our body temperature. So obviously if our body temperature drops too low, that's the end for us, and if it goes too high, that's the end for us as well. So we have an optimum range. Okay, so around 37 degrees Celsius. So in the UK, yeah, you can look that up in Fahrenheit. I don't know the conversion rate off the top of my head. I think 37 degrees Celsius is about 70, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. Or a bit higher. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'll put it on the screen if I remember. And then you got a degree or so below, about a degree or so below, and a degree or so above that. And if it starts going, dropping below that, you've got hypothermia. So obviously you don't want to get into a state of hypothermia in the cold. You want to dress appropriately. And I have got a video talking about the clothing that I recommend for winter cycling. So I'll put a link to that here. I actually did a ride a few winters ago for 6 hours, and the average temperature was -6. Yeah, it was a nice, beautiful, dry winter day, and if you dress appropriately, you can actually be fine. Okay. So to maintain your body temperature, you're going to have to burn more chemical energy in order to maintain heat. So when you are out in the cold, you're going to need to actually also eat more. So when you're out in the cold and your body is staying warm, it's going to start burning through, yes, more carbohydrate, but also more fat. However, so yeah, there's also another thing. If you start shivering, for example, you start shivering, you're starting to get cold. That's also using more energy to stay warm. Whereas versus if you're training in warm weather, the reason why people think that actually they get leaner quicker in the summer is just about perception of how the environment affects the way that we behave. So in the cold, people are probably more likely not wanting to go out and train and do as much and move their body as much, versus in the warm, in the spring or the summer, or if you're just in a warm climate, you're more likely going to want to go out and move your body, get out cycling, maybe running if you've done it a lot. And just physically, you're moving more and you're more motivated to lose weight or stay lean. Whereas in the winter, especially in the northern hemisphere, you're more likely just not to do anything. Just like other animals that we see in nature that put on weight during the winter. And that's a segue into, so it's middle of January 2026, but whenever this video maybe is recommended to you, I always recommend eating a little bit more fat coming into a period where it's cold if you're going to start doing exercise. And that is actually just to put on a little bit of weight. Okay, but that's very dependent on your own body weight at the moment. So obviously if you just look in the mirror, you just look in the mirror, you don't even need to step on the scales. If you just look in the mirror and just see yourself in the mirror, and are you visibly by eye? Okay, yeah. Perceptions are different from person to person, but yeah, if you're already carrying extra weight, extra body fat, then no, you don't need to necessarily go out and start adding more fat to your diet. So if you're already lean, like, for example, I am, and you can see in other videos, I'm always lean. And that's because now I've got other videos talking about all this, but once you've eaten this way, starch and fruit for a long time, your body is healthy, for example. So your body is healthy. So that's the first thing. So you don't necessarily have any metabolic imbalances where you maybe have had to starve yourself, you've been through starvation, or maybe overeating and starving overeating because you're worried about your weight. So you're eating lots of fat, and the only way you think you can control your body weight is either by eating a lot or not eating. Whereas starch and fruit, if you're just eating these low-fat foods, you're just going to be naturally just a healthy, lean body weight. So for example, for me, I'm 5'11", and I haven't done much at the time of recording this video, much exercise for the last 3 months, because I've been writing a book. So my body weight is averaged about 69 to 69.4 kilos for the last 3 months. I've averaged about 1.5 hours a week of cycling, really, at the most. It's the least I've done probably in the last decade. And I haven't just uncontrollably suddenly gained weight, because I've still been eating starches and fruits. And the reason why I'm not maybe about 65 or 66 kilos that I have been in maybe in other videos is because in November, so about three and a half months ago at time recording this video, I was going to be doing training through the winter, November, December, January. So I actually put on extra weight because I recommend just adding a bit more fat if you're already lean. But because I've been doing this book, I haven't necessarily burnt that off, so to speak, through more exercise. So my body weight has just been maintained at about that weight. So, a lot of people, for if they were talking about BMI, they'd probably say that was about perfect, or as perfect as a healthy, observable body weight would be for my height. So yeah, if you're already lean, a lean BMI for your height, then, and BMI isn't the end all, shouldn't be taken exactly. Also take what you look like in the mirror as well. So that's what I always say. If you obviously carrying extra weight, then yeah, you have room to get leaner. So for example, I was about 65, 66 kilos coming into starting training. So I actually had some fatty foods. So if you are in the position where you're already lean, then yeah, you can add in foods like vegan burgers, for example, vegan donuts. Hopefully the light you can see. The vegan burger, vegan donuts. You've got some fries. Or what have we got? Maybe some pizza. Some pizza there. Maybe some crisps for that. So this is not how I would expect you to eat, but just for a few weeks of the year, you can put on. If you are in a position where you're already lean and you're coming into a spell of doing training in cold weather, then I would recommend eating a bit more fatty foods just to put on a few kilos. And the reason for this is because training in the cold, you're losing more weight, you're burning more fat, burning through fat quicker than you would be in warm weather. To maintain your body weight, naturally, to maintain the same body weight, you'd have to eat more fat. So eating more fat before you start a period of training in the cold means that you're not going to get, during that period, too lean. And the way you know that you're getting too lean is if you have a power meter. So I always talk about power meter. So power meter allows you to see that if you're training and you're for your perceived effort, the power is starting to go down. So maybe, for example, if 200 watts was easy inverted commas, that was just what you could ride at all day. And maybe 6 weeks into your training and you're just still eating starch and fruit, low fat foods. Even if you start to eat lots of rice, it's very low fat. And if you're eating lots of bananas, very, very low fat. You might see that it starts to affect the power that you can put out. Okay. So if you're starting 200 watts 6 weeks later, if 200 watts starts to feel harder than it should, you start to notice maybe the higher powers, like maybe 400 or 500 watts, starts to get very, very difficult. Then you might need to readjust. Okay, readjust. And yes, in that period, maybe you can eat some more fat for a week or two. But I like to increase the fat before starting a training block, or I would recommend probably, keeping the fat intake in just to one block and not necessarily start adding it more and more. Whereas if you just eat it in one go and then you can do your training through the winter or just living through the winter, you're not going to periodically start adding more fat, which is, I would not recommend doing that. So I hope you enjoy the video and hope that breaks this misunderstanding about, hot weather training, cold weather training. A lot of people, they get confused and think, well, I get lean in the summer. And I think it's just, if you think about it, it's just the way we perceive our environment. So it's just about motivation. So I always get very, very lean in the winter because the diet firstly, but because it's cold. And that's the same for all animals, really. You know, cold-blooded, warm-blooded, yeah, it's a bit different. So yeah, mammals, but you can compare. That's why a lot of, you know, these cold weather animals, you know, like fish. So fish, they eat more omega fats. The cold water fish, they have more omega fats, so they're more fatty from plants. Okay, so omegas come from plants and they just bioaccumulate more fat. Whereas warm water fish, they have less because they don't need to worry about keeping their body temperature warm. You know, you look at, you know, like polar bears. You know, polar bears, they add on fat, you know, as they're going into the winter to protect them. They have more body fat, more chemical energy stored. But keeping it to humans, yes, we need to maintain our body temperature because we're warm blooded animals. About 37 degrees, and this allows all of the chemical reactions, all the enzymes. If we drop temperature or increase the temperature, enzymes will start to denature, so proteins, they start to change shape. And yeah, it's very interesting, but also quite scary if you think about it, how small the ranges that our bodies can operate in, but amazing how we can still operate in a range of temperatures. But obviously we have to still be careful. So we can operate from very, very cold temperatures to very, very hot temperatures. So just like we see these, you know, explorers who are out in the cold, we hear stories of, you know, past explorers to the Arctic and the Antarctic, where they were eating incredible amounts of calories a day, 10,000, 15,000, and I think I've seen it something like 17,000 calories or more. And these people still lost weight. And it's because in the cold, you're burning through lots of energy just to maintain your body heat, whereas you're not doing that necessarily when it's warm. Obviously, you have adaptations, so in the cold, keeping the body temperature warm. But in the warmth, you know, you can sweat, your blood vessels dilate to try and get rid of heat. So, and when you sweat, when it evaporates, that takes heat from the surface. Whereas when it's cold, you're actually upregulating your metabolism in order to burn more energy to create more heat. So you're going to burn through more glucose and you're going to burn through more lipid. So I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope you don't take this video as an excuse to start eating more fatty foods. Okay, so we don't eat. The burgers and crisps are not part of a healthy lifestyle. Okay, and the donut. Okay, the donut, again, it's a fatty food sprinkled with sugar, and you find that out if you start eating more donuts. Okay, more donuts versus white rice. So if you say sugar makes you fat, well, rice is pretty much as close as you can get to white table sugar as a complete food in terms of the amount of sugar that's in it. And when we think of people who are lean, we don't think of maybe Americans, for example, people who live in the West, in Europe, the Western world. They eat the standard Western diet or standard American diet. We don't think of those sorts of people as eating white rice. You know, I would assume someone would be eating a burger and a donut and crisps in the West. Whereas if I was going to think of someone who lived in Vietnam or Malaysia or rural China, generally East Asia, I'd be thinking of lots of people who are eating rice. You know, Japanese eating lots of rice, white rice. And I personally wouldn't associate those sorts of people with obesity, and the figures back that up with they have low rates of obesity. However, where people eat more donuts and more crisps and more burgers, obesity rates go up. Okay, so it's about the type of food you eat. Okay, about the type of food you eat, not how much you do. And that could be as well for training, for exercise. Yeah, if you want to get really fit, then yes, generally doing exercise rather than just sitting on the couch, you're going to get fitter doing more exercise than just sitting down. And you're going to lose weight quicker doing it in the cold. So only eat fatty foods if you are already lean. You can step on the scales. Generally, I think looking in the mirror is a very good way to see, if you're literally carrying more fat, you know that you don't need to eat more fat. Whereas if you're lean, you've got a lean tummy, you're lean, then yes, you can eat more fat for a short period of time. So if you got any comments, put them in the comment section. And yes, I forgot to say, if you're eating something like a banana, okay, during training, for example, very low fat food versus a very high fat food. You're eating more of the high fat food versus the low fat food. It should be obvious you're going to lose weight. Okay, you're going to lose weight eating foods like this. As soon as you break free from sugar makes you fat, and you realize it's actually fat that makes you fat. Fat makes you fat. Sugar does not make you fat. So there you go. I've got other videos talking about that. The whole premise of being healthy. Someone who cares about being healthy doesn't just listen to, well, I need to get my healthy fats. Okay, someone who's educated about themselves doesn't just look at packaging or doesn't just look at social media and believe that hot weather is actually how you get lean. It's cold weather. So you don't need to go out into the cold and torture yourself, okay? So you can dress adequately. Yeah, you could do training on your turbo trainer, for example, in your garage. Maybe lift the garage, have the garage door open. The garage could be cold. There's so many different ways if you think about if you want to get healthy. So yeah, if there's anything I missed, anything that you think you want more detail on to explain, then yeah, comment in the comment section. So I'm starting to get cold, so I'm starting to burn through more fat. As soon as you start getting cold, you're going to start to upregulate your metabolism in order to stay warm. It's that simple. It's just laws of physics. Okay. For any action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. There's one. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.